Hello, can you hear me? Not really? Can you hear me now? Okay, so the forum's gonna start. So get your coffee and snacks and go there. And then if you wanna go read for the Solstice Badger pageant and be a part of it, please go into the assembly room. Thank you. Yeah, I told people to go to the assembly room.
Hey, anybody who wants to be in the pageant play, please join us in the assembly room. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to be getting a little bit of a late start here for obvious reasons. Good to see all of you folks. I'm Tyler Taylor, a member of the church and co-chair of the Forums team. Welcome everyone to the second Sunday Forum for this month. I'm pleased to introduce Kathleen Crislip to be our speaker today. Kathleen is a nurse practitioner, and she's been treating substance use disorders since 2017, and she's been working for the Porch Light Health offices or health system since 2019. Kathleen is the medical director for Porch Light's New Mexico operations and for part of their Colorado operations. And she and I have gotten to know each other a bit over the last few months as the Interfaith Coalition on Homelessness has started really exploring what are ways to try to reduce homelessness in Espanola, and how does substance use disorders sort of fit in? And since this is very, very much what they're all about and experts at, it's been interesting learning from her and for our coalition to start thinking about, is this an area, i.e. substance use disorders, where we really would like to focus our energies as a way to have an impact on root causes of homelessness. So I'm very appreciative of Kathleen for coming today and bringing her expertise. I'll turn it over to her.
Good morning. We are going to talk this morning about substance use disorder. Can you hear me? Good morning. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, my goodness. Good morning. We're going to talk this morning about substance use disorder, specifically opioid use disorder, what it is, who's affected, what it looks like here in our neighborhood, and maybe what we can do. I'm first going to talk a little bit about who I am and the organization I work for so that you know where I'm coming from. I'm Kathleen Crislip. I'm a family nurse practitioner and medical director for Porch Light Health. I was previously a primary care provider and nurse practitioner for Presbyterian Medical Services in Santa Fe. I'm from Steamboat Springs, Colorado. I live in Santa Fe, and I've been with Porch Light since 2019. So this isn't an ad for Porch Light, but I want you to know a little bit about who we are and where I'm coming from. So Porch Light is an outpatient clinic network treating substance use disorder for anyone who wants to walk in the door from age 14 up. We've got 66 points of care. Ooh, I can see that I'm going to fall behind with the switching slides, so bear with me. We've got 66 points of care in Colorado and New Mexico. We started with one doc and his wife opening a tiny clinic in the basement of a dentist's office in Fort Collins back in 2014, and from there have expanded to these 66 points of care. And we're actually in 5 New Mexico towns now, which I'm leading: Farmington, Taos, Espanola, Albuquerque, and Las Cruces. We provide low barrier, high access care. Again, meaning we basically turn no one away, regardless of ability to pay or other factors that are often detrimental to receiving care. Our vision and what we're talking about today is that we indeed envision a society where the treatment of addiction, related conditions, mental health disorders is accessible, understood, offered with respect and dignity. So what does that look like? We offer medication-assisted treatment, or MAT, psychiatry to MAT patients with co-occurring mental health issues, behavioral health counseling, Hep C treatment, and HIV PrEP. And I'm going to explain in a second here what MAT is. So let's get down to it. Let's talk a little bit about substance use disorder and what treatment looks like. So first, why this talk? I understand you're interested in helping your community and your neighbors. And your neighbors are very hard hit by substance use disorder and have been since the Vietnam War. This is not a recent problem in New Mexico. This has existed for decades. Today, Espanola and Chimayo have the 14th highest opiate overdose rate in the country. Rio Arriba County has an overdose rate when extrapolated out to 100,000, which is not a great way to do a statistic, but you know, we can make statistics say what we want, but according to data from the CDC, that rate is 135 deaths per. So Fort Collins, in contrast, where we started because such a need was seen by our founder, has a rate of 25. So 25 compared to 135 in Rio Arriba County. This is, I think, a kind of a stunning visual representation of the issue in New Mexico. That blood red spot there in northern New Mexico is Rio Arriba County. And notice it doesn't really look like that again until you hit Appalachia in the east, which of course was considered by many to be the epicenter of the prescription opiate crisis. So the not so great news is that things are not really improving in an overall way. But the good news is that certain measurables have improved, namely overdose deaths. National surveys compiled by the CDC are already showing for 23 and 24 an unprecedented decline in drug deaths of roughly 10.6%, which is huge. That's a huge reversal from recent years when fatal overdoses regularly increased every year by double-digit percentages. So a positive in that scene is the distribution of naloxone, Narcan. That's the life-saving medication that reverses overdoses. That's become steadily more available. It became over-the-counter in 2023, which is part of what's known as harm reduction. You can see here on the graphic on the left that New Mexico, which has long been very progressive in some ways in treating opioid use disorder, has been embracing the distribution of naloxone, Narcan, and in fact led the nation in 2019, as you can see on the left there, and continues to valiantly carry that task. There are other things going on that have impacted this overdose death rate dropping. Lots of opinions about what it is. Not really sure. Targeting, law enforcement targeting, Mexican drug cartels, the end of COVID isolation. Don't know yet, but it's good news. Another positive in the scene over the that's been improving over the last decade is that opiate prescribing has come down to a more manageable level, including in Rio Arriba County. Again, that's 2019 on the left and 2023 on the right. Opiate prescribing gets a lot of blame for the opiate crisis, as it should, but it's far from the whole picture. Again, you know, we've had an issue here in New Mexico with heroin since Vietnam, long before infamous Purdue came on the scene with OxyContin, which they pushed so hard nationwide, and kind of manipulative marketing designed to appeal to compassion. This is New Mexico from 2015 to January 2023. Again, sharp rise in overdose deaths, which, though, were already discouragingly high per capita in our state. Data from 2023 isn't quite complete yet, but it seems it mirrors that national good news. I think I skipped a slide here. Hang on. Here we go. So fentanyl has, of course, raised the stake in opiate deaths. Fentanyl is a legal drug, and it's a wonderfully effective painkiller. It's, however, cheaper and easier to manufacture than heroin. The raw material can be gotten by any home chemist and stamped into what's called pressed pills, which is what it sounds like, a home chemist in his basement with a press that stamps out pills. And the pills look just like the real thing, but they're often filled with other dangerous chemicals like xylazine, the animal tranquilizer. And of course, the actual dose of whatever's in that pill is completely unknown to the user, utterly unknown. Patients say that fentanyl feels more accessible than heroin, and of course that's dependent on where you are. We hear that in some parts of northern New Mexico, heroin is still very much available. In suburban Loveland, Colorado, it hasn't been seen in a couple of years. But however you slice it, fentanyl is many tens of times more potent and thus potentially much more deadly than heroin. The social isolation we already experienced to some degree with social media and our phones was very heightened during COVID. All of that may have contributed to that sharp rise in overdose deaths in recent years. And of course, methamphetamine and cocaine also have fentanyl in it these days, which is also contributing to overdose deaths. It's kind of everywhere. But again, there is some good news. So who is dying? Who is dying of overdoses? Everyone, basically. The data above comes from the CDC's State Unintentional Drug Overdose Reporting System, SUDORS. SUDORS collects data on unintentional and undetermined intent drug overdose deaths from death certificates, medical examiner, coroner reports, postmortem toxicology results. And, you know, an interesting note here, I think, is that 35 to 44-year-old Hispanic women are at such risk in New Mexico, which is a little bit different than the rest of the nation. But again, every age, ethnicity, and gender is at risk of overdose death. So returning to positives for a minute. let's note that the drugs we abuse do have a purpose and shouldn't be vilified as such, in my opinion. For 85 to 90% of people, an opiate for a kidney stone will wind up staying in the medicine cabinet for years. For others, that first prescription in the emergency department or the ongoing prescription for chronic back pain ultimately leads to addiction if one is vulnerable genetically, environmentally. Adverse childhood events, ACEs, can lead to an emotionally difficult adult life, or genetic makeup can dictate that one doesn't quite metabolize alcohol, for instance, in the same way as does their step sibling with exactly the same upbringing. And one will struggle with alcohol and one does not. Let's talk for a second about those ACEs. Adverse childhood events can lead to substance or other health issues. ACEs risk is determined by a scoring system of certain events that occur in one's life before the age of 18, and they're events that can happen to anyone from Park Avenue to Park Bench. We can never know what's brewing genetically and environmentally for someone else, even here in relatively affluent, well-educated, stable Los Alamos. A high ACE score or genetic predisposition doesn't mean one gets addicted from one pill or drink or snort, but one use can ignite hitherto kind of unknown joy and pleasure, a novel experience that someone in despair or with emotional damage or a genetic predisposition may seek to recreate, and eventually find that that one pill or drink or snort at a time is no longer enough, because, and any medical folks in the room will know that this is hugely oversimplifying, but the brain's reward system has come to expect a certain level as a status quo, and physically and emotionally painful withdrawal with an almost overwhelming drive to fix that will result from the drug's lack. So how does that happen? So let's take a side trip into science, if you'll pardon me. A pathway important to understanding the effects of drugs on the brain is called the reward pathway. So the reward pathway involves several parts of the brain, some of which are highlighted in this slide. The ventral tegmental area, the VTA, the nucleus accumbens, and the prefrontal cortex, which is part of the executive decision-making process. So when activated by a rewarding stimulus like food or water, information travels from the VTA to the nucleus accumbens and then up to the prefrontal cortex, where hopefully an informed decision for action on that stimulus is made. The cortex isn't fully capable of the best executive decision making before the age of 25, by the way. So to understand the next part of that process in the reward pathway, we need to understand dopamine a little. So dopamine is a neurochemical action stimulus. That's what the reward system kind of operates on. So dopamine is the go-get-it neurochemical that drives us to stimuli or rewards and behaviors that we need for survival, like food and water. Drugs kind of hack or hijack that reward system, produce higher levels of dopamine initially, and after a time, the brain gets used to that stimulant, so needs more of a dopamine boost, and thus for some, a drug will eventually be responded to as a survival need to stay ahead of the fear of, the need to survive, the need to actually survive, and the pain caused by the drug's lack, which causes low dopamine and stressful, painful withdrawal symptoms, hence the vicious cycle of addiction, where the urge to use, caused in part by fluctuating dopamine levels, can feel like a life or death survival need and lead to decisions made just to stop the pain and fear. And the prefrontal cortex will produce too weak a don't jump off the roof signal to stop that cycle. So, all of this is why I have such intense respect for people who were able to stop this cycle. This is physiologically very, very difficult. All of this means that, yes, addiction is a disease. Oh, there we go. Addiction is a disease. It shares traits common with all chronic disease. It's measurable, just like we measure diabetes with blood tests or multiple sclerosis with brain imaging. PET scans of the brain, which is what we're looking at, show objective changes. It's chronic and relapsing. We are genetically vulnerable, all the characteristics of chronic disease. And it responds to chronic disease management strategies. So ultimately, to recap, drug addiction is a complex illness. Over time, a person's ability to choose not to take drugs is compromised. This, in large part, is a result of the effects of prolonged drug use on brain functioning, like we just looked at, and thus on behavior. So addiction is characterized by compulsive drug craving, seeking, and use that persists even in the face of negative consequences. This is why sheer willpower is not always, sometimes not usually, the best path to simply quitting a drug, including opiates, cigarettes, alcohol, you name it. Those who aren't addicted will say to a loved one, "Can't you just stop for me, for the kids? We're going to lose the house. You lost your job." It's helpful to remember that impaired executive decision-making. It's not that they love the drug more than they love us or want to burn down their lives. It's that they're caught in a terrible cycle of chronic brain disease. So in opioid addiction in particular, what is medication's role? Medications like buprenorphine, methadone, and naltrexone work. They're not a cure, but they level the playing field so folks can engage in the hard work of recovery. They make it possible to address the other lacking social determinants of health, like housing, food scarcity, healthcare lack, isolation. So how do they work? So once again, forgive me if I get in the weeds here, but I'm a medical provider, so it's easiest for me to speak in science sometimes. So we have some receptors in our brains that you can imagine as golf tees, sort of like this graphic here. They're named for Greek letters, mu, delta, kappa, etc. Mu receptors are among the main players in our natural opioid receptors for our naturally produced or endogenous opioids, if you will, and inhibit the release of GABA. So that inhibition increases dopamine concentrations, remember dopamine, in the nucleus accumbens, remember that part of the brain's role in the reward pathway. Endogenous natural opioids may increase the liking and wanting of rewards, right? Like not only just survival, but wanting of sweets or connection, and reduce fear conditioning and sensitivity to aversive stimuli. So thus, filling a mu receptor, our little kind of golf tee looking things here, with heroin or fentanyl, you can see how the reward pathway gets all hijacked. And this causes physical and emotional problems when one tries to stop using the drug that's filling that receptor. A hitherto filled receptor that's suddenly empty in withdrawal is going to be screaming to be filled, in essence. And this whole cascade creates terrible symptoms that feel like the worst flu ever times 10, with over-the-top anxiety thrown in. And to super oversimplify, and please forgive me for that, overfilled receptors can have our brainstem just go ahead and tell us to stop breathing, contributing to overdose death. So that's mu and the other Greek letter receptors. So those are a background to helping you understand how these medications work. Our gold standard treatments for opioid use disorder, methadone and buprenorphine, commonly called by its brand name Suboxone, fills those mu receptors and to some degree fills some other letters of the the Greek alphabet and keeps withdrawal away. Buprenorphine is an opioid discovered in the lab in 1966 and developed for pain, and was approved to treat opioid use disorder in 2002. And you can see from this graphic that it works because it fills the receptor. If you're ever prescribed buprenorphine for pain, you'll see it works as well as oxycodone for pain. But it's unpopular as a pain medication, I think, because it provides no euphoria. And, frankly, euphoria is part of the way that prescription opioids can help us cope with a kidney stone or a broken leg. So fentanyl sits on its moo golf tee, like a golf ball. You remember our other graphic, and is thus called a full agonist. And buprenorphine sits on it kind of like a wiffle ball, or in this graphic, a bunch of little wiffle balls with holes in it, a partial agonist. So when opiate use disorder is being treated with buprenorphine, the golf tee receptor is filled by the wiffle balls, and withdrawal stops. But the wiffle ball part means there's a ceiling on the risk of respiratory depression, pretty much gone, and one won't get much of a high, if any, hopefully if the dose is right, none, or overdose. So then if the overwhelming agony of withdrawal stops because that receptor is harmlessly activated, a person might be able to move on with recovery. Methadone also fills the golf tee, but it's not a wiffle ball. It's a regular golf ball. Buprenorphine has turned into, for some of the industry, like me, it is my preference, the gold standard over methadone, in part because it is this partial agonist wiffle ball with such low risk. As well, the dispensation of methadone is still highly government regulated, so there can unfortunately be some difficulty around it. Getting it, going to the clinic, kind of some stigma around it. You may have to get to a distant clinic for a daily dose taken in front of an employee. With buprenorphine, one can see a provider like me. I write a prescription, you go fill it, although we have challenges with that in Espanola, and move on. So basically, medication says, this is your life, your choice, your recovery. You're empowered to take control. You're empowered to be trusted. Here's a week's worth of this medication that'll stop withdrawal and allow you to start healing your life and those battered moo receptors. But either buprenorphine or methadone empowers folks to legally take charge of their recovery. And it's pretty much 100% effective at stopping withdrawal at the right dose. Again, methadone also fills the receptor, stops withdrawal very effectively, does have its uses and purposes, absolutely. It just happens to be my preference to work in OUD mat using buprenorphine. But both are vital components of our national efforts at treating opiate use disorder. We also have naltrexone in our toolbox. You could envision that it sort of lays on those receptors like a blanket, repelling endorphins that create a reward response. So a little different process than what we talked through before, but still that reward pathway. There are many ways that we use naltrexone in treating substance use disorders, but basically it keeps cravings at bay. And that kind of, can have its own shortcomings in keeping endogenous good chemical signals out too, but that's a real rabbit hole I won't go down right now because I'll probably run out of time, but it's an interesting discussion. Naltrexone has good evidence for providing just huge help for folks stopping alcohol, as there are slightly different receptors involved in alcohol and in stimulant use disorder, which naltrexone impacts, but it can't be used simultaneously with buprenorphine or methadone. So this all speaks to why, in my medical opinion, medication-assisted treatment is not, as is sometimes said, switching one drug for another. This is why medication gives one a fighting chance. This can help to change brain chemistry and give the brain a fighting chance to heal and recover, and the sufferer a fighting chance to have a good life. And I am backed up with people by many more letters behind their name than I. So what's new and next? In my opinion, injectable buprenorphine and naltrexone, which are pictured here, Sublocade, Vivitrol, and Brixadi, are tremendous advances in making opiate use disorder treatment even easier, reducing stigma, providing a way to help the most underserved populations. There are monthly and weekly injections. These are not the way to go for everyone. They're not the greatest thing since pressed ham, and they're not going to guarantee that your loved one does not use. But they do mean a patient no longer has to carry medication around in their pocket, worry about running out and feeling sick. Injectables can also be enormously helpful for those leaving incarceration and for unhoused folks. So the former may need to get home from jail or find a home, and they can't instantly go find a clinic and get a prescription. Maybe it's Sunday, maybe the pharmacy is out. An injection given before they leave jail can be very helpful in easing that transition. For unhoused folks, their medication can be easily stolen or lost, just like any of their possessions. So, and getting to the pharmacy can be very challenging. So injectables are kind of the wonderful frontier of addiction medicine. What leads to treatment success? Non-judgmental, empathetic care, access, confidentiality, combining medication with behavioral treatment, and staying in treatment for an adequate amount of time. But there's a variety of scientifically based approaches to drug addiction. As we evolve in the treatment world, this graphic represents the direction we're moving with current best practices. A simple prescription once a month is not the whole answer. A prescription once a week might be a big part of the answer, with weekly support from a provider being optimal, but we continue to evolve. Treatment can include behavioral therapy, counseling, cognitive therapy, psychotherapy, and medications, any combination thereof. Case management, referral to other medical, psychological, and social services are crucial components of treatment for many folks as well. So the best programs really provide a combination of therapies and referral to other services to meet the needs of the individual patient, which are shaped by a variety of factors: age, race, culture, gender, sexual orientation, pregnancy, parenting, housing, employment. So patient-centered treatment in opiate use disorder is crucial. So obstacles to treatment. What can you do? The community any community can get behind creating and maintaining that recovery team that we're just talking about. Medical, behavioral, case management, familial, community, vocational. Medical can't do that all. Supporting shelters, volunteering at food banks, helping to support or provide those social determinants of health to get folks on their feet as they struggle to start and stay in recovery is very helpful. Stigma. We can do so much to fight stigma. We can talk. Talk is free. Talking about this is the path forward in the future. We can reduce social isolation. So you've seen that no one, I hope from this, I hope I've described adequately that no one chooses to grow up and be a drug addict. They're shaped like as surely as clay on a potter's wheel. We don't judge those with cancer as weak or lacking willpower, and we're trying to do the same with substance use disorder treatment. This picture is our chief medical officer at a huge event he helped put on in Colorado, educating and advocating, which is part of fighting the stigma. Again, we don't judge those with arthritis or Parkinson's as morally weak or lacking character or willpower. So we're trying to do the same with substance use disorder. We're focusing on the positive. We're choosing empowerment. We're helping others avoid social isolation. We can challenge stigma in the delivery of services. That's something we can all do. The treatment landscape is no longer quite the free street clinics of Haight-Ashbury in 1967. This is our Espanola clinic, for instance. Our clinic's respectful, clean, easy to access, helpful, compassionate. Most SUD clinics are. It's okay to have folks like us in the neighborhood. You can help support MAT treatment in rural county jails. There's legislation happening in New Mexico in 2025 that will require MAT in county jails. Statistics show that having buprenorphine on board when one leaves jail, like we were talking about, where one might be to begin with for drug use or its sequelae, reduces recidivism. If when we hear that drug addicts are being cosseted on the taxpayer dime, we can know that that's a whole lot more cost effective than the patient getting out and moving into an unhoused situation, perhaps being reduced to crime to survive and keep those terrible symptoms that I was talking about at bay. I wanted to bring one specific action item here today because I've been told that you're working to support the Pathway Shelter in Espanola. The Rio Arriba Community Health Council, which is a county-wide team of folks from very cross-sectional from all aspects of social services, medical, city and county government, has come together, meets once a month, and creates action teams. And the housing action team is right now hoping to get volunteers to help canvass the city for an accurate count of the unsheltered population in Espanola. And I've put the name and contact number, which I'm happy to give anybody after this, for the woman who's heading that up. And then Los Alamos resources, which I failed to add the slide, but your fabulous Boomtown, your kind of your online news source, has a great page on finding support in Los Alamos. Not only places where you can find support, but possibly places where you can lend support if you like to. And I feel like I've probably talked past my allotted time, but I really thank you for your time. Thank you so much. And I would like to hear from you. What are your stories? What are your thoughts? What would you like to do for Los Alamos? What would you like to do for your neighboring communities? Can I give you any information about that? How can I help? Or do you have questions about what we've talked about today?
Thank you so much, Kathleen. So I'll wander around and hand the microphone to anybody who has a question or comment.
We had heard in a meeting that there's a problem with detox, and I'm not sure from your presentation that they need to, it doesn't sound like they need to be detoxed, but we heard that the hospital in Espanola could do this, and then, transfer them to you, but Medicaid won't pay for it in our state. Do you have anything you can add to that?
Probably. So you are correct that detox, sorry, I'm going to use air quotes, detox per se is not always necessary for stopping opiate use. The gold standard in the industry is to provide comfort medications that will help a patient get through the period that they need, for anywhere from 6 to 48 hours, to stop using an opiate before they fill those receptors with that buprenorphine. So the vast majority of our patients, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of people have successfully done this at home. That doesn't mean there aren't people who cannot. And generally we send those folks to an inpatient detox recovery facility. But for the most part, we can do that at home. Española's hospital, yes, can walk people through the worst of it, and I definitely don't want to speak for the Española hospital, but then send them to us for continuity of care. Alcohol is a little bit different story. So we are different. The American Society of Addiction Medication or Addiction Medicine has several levels of outpatient treatment that are safe for alcohol withdrawal. From level 1, which is what we are, to 2 to 3 to 3.3, I can't remember what they all are, but they kind of range from outpatient can do this at home to the ICU. So what we do in our clinic is triage folks. You can do this safely at home based on a number of criteria that are really plainly spelled out by ASAM, the American Society of Addiction Medicine, or you need to go to the hospital, or you need to go into detox. And detox everywhere, not just here in northern New Mexico, but everywhere is lacking. It lacks funding. It's very difficult. But we do have a couple good options. We have Santa Fe Recovery. We have some places in Albuquerque. There are options for actual detox. And we don't detox people from benzodiazepines generally. We'll do a long, slow taper outpatient. So the actual need for detox is mostly for us limited to patients who can't safely stop drinking outpatient.
Just in follow-up to that, if people do need detox and they're admitted to the hospital in Española, will Medicaid cover that care?
I hesitate to answer.
Okay.
New Mexico Medicaid is, in my opinion, I have a license to practice in a few states, and in my opinion, New Mexico Medicaid is very generous and very accommodating. I have not seen that yet myself, but it doesn't mean that's not true. Sorry.
I had heard from Dr. Hayes that Medicaid won't cover detox in certain settings, and I'm not sure which settings it will and won't cover.
Yeah, I could see that based on a few factors.
Other questions, comments?
How does Porch Light get its funding?
So we're a private clinic network. So we're based almost strictly on insurance reimbursement. We do have some grants. There are getting to be a substantial number of grants available, both from the federal and state government, that are specifically targeted to do specific things. So they don't pay for our operation, but they can pay for us to perhaps go serve a very rural community where it's not self-sustaining to actually have a clinic without the help of a grant. And that gives us, we've done that a lot in Colorado, and that gives us the room to figure out if we can sustain a clinic long run. But we will take anyone regardless of ability to pay. Once folks get into sobriety and get on their feet, then one of the things we can help them do is get insurance.
I'm just curious what your background and path to knowing so much about this was. I mean, are there courses? Are there, what did you do to get to the level of your expertise?
Well, I don't know that I'm an expert, but I got to this place with, I have 2 advanced degrees, one in family medicine and one in psych. And I deliberately chose this path. Actually went back to school to become a nurse practitioner to take this path, and did clinical rotations with what was then really the only and largest MAP program in northern New Mexico, which was being done through PMS, and learned that way. And then chose to go to work for Porch Light because their mission most closely matches my own, which is very much low barrier, high access.
Would you comment on success rates with buprenorphine when used for OUD, when it's given orally and when it's given by injection over, a year or 2 years or whatever time?
So there aren't statistics that I can quote on that. That would just be anecdotal. And the difference between the two is so patient dependent. The difference between success with the two is so patient dependent that it's difficult to say. It also depends on what is your measurement of that outcome. Have they stayed sober for months and months? Did they stay sober for that 1 month while the medication was on board? Is that really a success? Or did they continue to come back and get injections the next month and the following month? The medication is pretty much 100% successful if one chooses to take it, chooses to go that route. Did that answer that? I feel like I might have sidestepped it a little bit, but there aren't really any good statistics on that I'm aware of.
So I'm more interested in the idea of reducing the stigma surrounding the issue, and part of that you say is talk, keep talking. I want to know the correct language to use. For example, you said something like disorder instead of a drug user. So can you share some of those languages with us so we can talk to people more fruitfully?
Avoiding shaming language and using empowering language is huge towards stopping the stigma. Bringing the disease out of the shadows and not letting it be the elephant in the room, and just talking about it the same way that you would talk about hypertension or diabetes is huge. You don't have to really have any particular special language or correct terminology to talk, right? You can just talk about it. This is just a disease like any other, and can be openly discussed. But trying to avoid labeling language is helpful because it further kind of perpetuates the idea that, like using the word junkie brings up a very negative picture, and using the word person who uses drugs rather than junkie would be helpful. I think we're all kind of familiar with the way that sort of terminology has gone in the last several years, but one way to think about it is when we describe someone by their disease, like addict, we are equating the person with the disease. We don't say he's cancer any more than we would want to say he's an addict. He's a cancer. He's not a cancer. He has the disease of cancer. We don't need to say he's an addict. We can say he has the disease of substance use. The users themselves, folks who are actually in the trenches fighting their disease, have the right to call themselves anything they want. They have the right to say anything that they want. But our job is to try to be as empowering and non-labeling with that language as we can. But other than that, we don't want to restrict ourselves from talking about it just in order to use the correct terminology, because we want to talk.
In that vein, sort of a framework that helps me, and I was thinking while you were going through your slides, that if one says every one of us has made plenty of mistakes in our lives, we made the wrong investment, we married the wrong person, we did something stupid in our car, whatever, that if one looks at it as somebody probably with a high ACE score made some mistakes at some point in their lives, and they ended up using substances that they thought they could handle, they made a mistake. Now they are caught in this disease. So it is a disease that they made the mistake of getting into. That does not mean they can get out of it just as easily by any stretch.
You're absolutely correct.
What's your opinion on legalized marijuana? Does it make your job easier or harder?
Oh gosh, I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can or should espouse my opinion about that. Opinions differ. I come from a state where marijuana has been legalized, and yeah, you know, that's probably one where I better say I'm not qualified to answer that. There's a whole lot that goes into that. Is marijuana actually a gateway drug? Is it actually going to cause somebody to move on to using other drugs? Man, there is a lot of discussion and research on either side. So sorry, but I don't think I can speak to that. I don't think I can speak to that in a justifiably informed way.
I had a question about someone with substance use disorder. Do they need to be on methadone or I don't know if I'm saying it right.
Buprenorphine.
Do they have
You
to be
can
on
say
that for
Suboxone. It's
Suboxone.
easier.
Do they have to be on that for life, or is it a tapering down? Does it vary by
You can
person?
absolutely be on it for life. If that's what's required for somebody, that's what's required. Again, it's each individual person has their own individual course of recovery. Patients do want to taper off it eventually if they can, partly because it's time. It's time to move away from taking this medication and not having the, you know, I mentioned having to carry it in your pocket. It's just time to move on with the next step of their life. And of course, we'll support. We have a taper program that we'll support patients with, but it's completely the patient's choice. We make the recommendation, which is backed up by research, that a patient stay on medication for at least a year. It can take that long just to start healing the brain a little bit. And a thing that was said to me early on in my training that really stuck with me is it's 5 miles into the woods and it's 5 miles out. So it takes what it takes.
Just a real technical question. If we have Narcan that we're keeping handy, can we keep it in a car through summer and winter, or will the temperatures end up causing it to deteriorate?
No, I don't think, as far as I know, I think you're supposed to store it below 70. Oh, you're supposed to store it below 77 degrees. Excursions permitted up to 104 degrees. Try not to freeze or expose to excessive heat. That said,
so spring and fall.
That said, I've seen it work. I've actually seen a Narcan work that sat in a glove box for 2 years. This is, would you guys like to see what Narcan looks like?
It's very easy to administer nasally. Just spray it in the nostril in a person who's unconscious, and comes in a easy to understand instructions.
If you remember those mu receptors, Narcan, naloxone, knocks everything out of those receptors in a second. So causing what looks like the miraculous recovery from an overdose, because all of those receptors are cleared, zoom, just like that.
Thank you for such an enlightening presentation, and thank you for the church here for hosting this. One of your slides about the ethnicities, I think maybe it was overdose deaths. I believe what I saw was that the Native American rate, or whatever it was just negligible, and our anecdotal evidence that we all know living around here is that we see many of our siblings in our surrounding tribes suffering. So how do you explain that?
Well, this data is so these are based on percentages of a whole So with a population that's a smaller percentage of the whole, the percentage is going to look smaller. It doesn't mean that the problem isn't enormous among our Native American family and friends. But the data has limitations. You can find this data on the CDC website, and you can choose to manipulate the outcome in different ways, or the result in different ways, so that you can see actual numbers, like per 100,000, for instance, which when you compare that to the actual number of the native population that you're looking at, you get a better picture.
You alluded to, in those critical steps to success with treatment, helping people stay in treatment. And in your experience in other communities and now in Espanola, can you just talk a little bit about, what really are the key factors for keeping people coming back? The barriers and the things to get around the barriers.
Absolutely. Access to treatment, access to care is the most crucial thing, and is what inspired us to do clinics the way we do it. We don't do primary care. We do hepatitis C and HIV PrEP because those are diseases that tend to affect our patient population. But we don't do primary care so that people can get in the same day. We can strike while the iron is hot. Someone says, I am ready to quit, come in, we'll take care of them. That's a difficult model to sustain. We've been lucky to do it because of my story about the founder toughing it out in the dentist's office basement. It's a difficult model to really get going. But it's difficult in primary care, for instance, which I worked in primary care, also doing MAT, and we could be 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months out before you could get an appointment. So access is absolutely critical. If you miss the opportunity, the window to help someone, it may be months before that person makes a decision, again, that very difficult decision to seek help and seek treatment. Confidentiality. So there are huge, the federal government has taken some real positive steps to make it easy to get into treatment and stay in treatment. One of them is, as part of the CARES Act, extra confidentiality protections were provided around substance use disorder. So you probably all heard of HIPAA, right? Which protects patient privacy. So there's another additional legislation that Uber protects patient privacy if you are being seen for a substance use disorder. In regular HIPAA, a provider in one place can talk to a provider in another place without necessarily having to get the patient's permission if you're talking about the same patient and how you're going to refer them to this nephrologist for specialized kidney care. For substance use disorder, the patient may not want their doctor to know that. They may not want their primary care doctor or their nephrologist or whoever it is to know that they're in treatment for substance use disorder until they're good and ready to tell them. So that protection, there's an added level of privacy protection for patients who are seeking substance use disorder. So helping patients to understand that confidentiality is paramount in the substance use disorder treatment world is crucial. We're not going to we're the last house on the block, and our porch light is always on. We're not going to turn patients into CYFD unless there's a good reason to, of course. We can't be subpoenaed well, we could be subpoenaed, but we can't be compelled to testify. There are vast protections for patients' confidentiality, which is just a huge advance. Again, staying in treatment for an extended period of time is key to success. Maybe the rest of their lives. Maybe it's all patient-centered. All depends on the individual patient. But some of those successes also include support, family support, community support, vocational support. The kind of support that you all can provide as a community, that acceptance.
Okay, we're getting close to 1 o'clock here, so maybe we should wind up. Thank you so much, Kathleen, for doing this. This has been very informative.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.